Okay, welcome to another episode of On the Wrist from Off the Cuff. Today we have a really cool review for you from the brand Momentum. A little bit about them. They were founded back in 1980 and they're out of Canada. They actually fall underneath the St. Moritz Watch Company, which has been in business for over 40 years. They did start out distributing and servicing for other well-known brands like Breitling well into the late 90s, then transitioned into basically being an OEM supplier, designing, building, and servicing watches for numerous non-watch brands like Land Rover, Eddie Bauer, Aqualung, Sierra Designs, the North Face, etc. They eventually started focusing on growing their own Momentum brand into the 2000s and on, really with well-spec'd divers and other outdoor-themed pieces at entry-level price points, while still offering custom-dialed specials for military and law enforcement entities, which is pretty cool. In terms of the type of watch, I think you can all tell here, this is a dive watch. Some key common characteristics. In design language, you're looking for a diver. Of course, you're going to want water resistance, typically through some type of screw-down crown. You're going to want something that's tough, legible with a dive time bezel, and a diver's extension is always nice if on bracelets. This is their Aquamatic 4 in 42 millimeters with the blue dial, and it's essentially the fourth generation of their premium automatic dive watch line, dating all the way back to the 90s. A classic Milsub inspired diver, packed with function forward features and refinements, and it is also assembled in Canada. You can get this direct from Momentum for $629. So with all that said, let's go ahead, zoom the camera out, get this piece in hand, and take a closer look. All right, guys, let's go ahead and jump in. First thing for me that's a standout is this colorway. This color combination is fantastic. I love this really deep, understated, and muted navy blue colorway. It's fantastic. It really is very reminiscent of, you know, those great Marine Nationale Tudor Snowflake Submariners. So I love this color choice. Man, that is beautiful. More brands need to do this deep and dark of a blue. I mean, don't get me wrong, I do love the pastels that pop and the aqua type of colorways, but this one for me is just very, very timeless, very understated, and extremely versatile. Now, in terms of the specs here, you're getting a 42 millimeter diver in terms of the width, and then 12 millimeters thick, so actually quite thin, and you can see that here, the side profile. This is a really thin diver, which is awesome. It's 50 millimeters lug to lug, so a little bit on the longer side, but I wouldn't say that it's a hindrance, especially with the female end links. So these, the bracelet will just fall off in terms of the drape on there. It's not like it's being led out to jut out in any way. And then also, the way that the lugs do have a slight turn down. This is a relatively flat case in terms of the side profile, but the contours and that slight curvation there towards the end really do help in terms of wearability. I'm sure some of you are thinking, wow, it's very SKX-like. Yes, it is very SKX-like in terms of the way that it wears, the fact that it has a 4 o'clock crown. But I mean, that's honestly where a lot of the similarities are, end. Well, that, and it has 22 millimeter lug with a 42 millimeter case. But if you actually look at the crown guards, it's actually very Rolex-like in terms of the way that they're integrated and butted up right against this nicely signed screw-down crown. And then even the case sides themselves, I know it definitely is a very much a calling card of Seiko to have these undercuts, but actually let me give it a quick little wipe here off camera. A lot of polishing on this one here. So, that can be a bit of a calling card, of course, for Seiko's cushion cases, but also, people forget that the Oyster cases also have really nice round contoured sides as well. So there is, a lot of shared DNA across a couple different models here that I think really come together in a nice cohesive way that feel very natural. It's a bit of an old school kind of design. Of course, it is tying back to very vintage roots, but I will say, like, this look of watch, You know, this does date back to the 90s, and this absolutely feels like the type of watch I'd say in the early and mid 2000s that I was really hunting for all the time, something like this, and I could never find something that really had this aesthetic. I love the fully graduated 60-minute bezel insert here, and then you can see also 120 click bezel. Let me get it going. Very nice action, quite smooth while still being clicky. Really not a lot of play. I will say that it is a low profile bezel, so you know, making sure that you're getting that tactile engagement can be slightly more challenging, you know, in terms of where to position your fingers. For me, 12 and 6, and with just a little bit of a push down, kind of similar to those older school Rolex bezels where you kind of had to push down and go to really make it extremely smooth. So very nice, very precise action, you know, especially for a dive watch. Now, you are getting a flat sapphire crystal with a date magnifier and AR coating. And you can see even the date there is really well done. You actually do have a framed date window, which is not always something that you see when there's a magnifier. A lot of times brands will forgo that. Pretty cool that they have the magnifier and that, because if you did, let's say, not like the magnifier and you wanted to just take a lighter to it, heat up the coating, and then pop it off with a razor blade, you would still have a framed date window underneath. So it does give you some options, and it, you know, it doesn't take away from the look. So really nice, and you can see the magnification actually works. Look how much bigger that date is versus, well, it's hard to kind of see at this angle, but you can see there. Nice. It fills out the window really, really well. Now, getting into some more details, we already mentioned the signed crown, the movement inside here. Check it out, guys. Gilt, yes, gilted finish there on the Miyota 9015. So very cool, nice little touch. I think it's actually fun that it, you know, plays a bit off of the blue and the gold. I don't know, there's just something about it. I dig that. It's a little pop of color that isn't necessarily necessary, but to have it there, it's just there's something fun about it, and warm in terms of that. So it does add a little pop of color to the case back there, which is screw down, and it does have some etching around. And then of course it is a display window, so you can see the nice movement inside. And I will say, because this is a dive watch, in terms of rotor whir, it's very solid. You're not going to really hear that. Let me try to. It's about the loudest it's going to get. I don't know if the microphone is even able to pick that up, but you can get a little bit for the real sticklers. But if that's something that bothers you about the Miyota 9015 movement or their 9000 series movement in general, then, you know, it's honestly pretty much a moot point here. It probably would be even more sound deadened if they would have went with a solid case back, but you know, it's nice to have a mechanical movement, you know, visible, especially when you have one that has nice finishing and is a modern movement, as you can see here with the Miyota. Very underrated movement, and honestly, and it's because it's so desirable that so many brands have put it in, you know, unfortunately, watches that, well, I guess fortunately and unfortunately, right? Unfortunately for Miyota, it's been put in a lot of cheap watches. Fortunately, it's a good movement, and it's nice to have, and it's quite thin. So getting into the dial from here, it has this nice matte blue dial. Of course, you're getting applied indices. You're getting that framed date window at 3 o'clock, polished handset. Everything is loomed. It's using Super Luminova, top grade. I don't know precisely which compound, because that wasn't actually listed within the specs, but I will say this thing glows like a champ, which I'm looking forward to showing you guys. 22 millimeter lugs. It does have a slight taper down to 20 millimeters. It has push pin connecting, and these are actually a full 3-link, so this is actually independent, so they're not fixed together. So if you wanted to do the weird, individual multi-link stacking thing, you could do that here. But that's really just to show you how much articulation you're going to get. Check that out. So that means not only while you're wearing the watch will fit better, but also when you're taking the watch on and off, it will also fit really nicely. So you can see you're getting 3 micro adjusts. This is a stamped clasp, but very standard. You are getting the milled folding section, which is great as well. And because of the way that this is set up, where it's held in with a spring bar, if you wanted to, you could always swap this out for something else, a little bit chunkier and more substantial. But with that said, let's go ahead, get this piece on the wrist and see how it wears. Okay guys, as you can see on my 7.5-inch wrist, this wears really well, really flat. Check that out, guys. That is 12 millimeters, right? Not counting, of course, the little Cyclops on there, the date magnifier, but this is extremely really thin. And one of the things that makes it even wear thinner is because it is a 42 millimeter diameter watch, so it does spread that thickness really well. Although, of course, when I have the watch really up close to the camera, you're going to get some lens distortion. So what I'll do is I'll keep my hand further away, and then I'll just tighten the shot up here so you guys can get a closer look while actually getting a decent idea of the actual proportions. You can see we're still really well centered on my wrist, even with that 50 millimeter lug to lug. And that is because, I mean, at the end of the day, the lugs are not very wide. They are rounded off. They are reflective, which means they're just reflecting your skin back off of the watch. And it looks really good. Man, that blue, I love the way that it plays with the light, and that it's just, it's very consistent. So it really has you focused on ultimate legibility with that fully indexed bezel, which is something that is very important, of course, for a dive watch, but also very important in terms of, the lineage of mil spec, watches in general, and those old Ministry of Defense specs. So very cool from that perspective. But with that said, let's actually get this off the wrist, charge it up and lay it out for some loom shots, low light transition, and closing thoughts. Okay, let's go ahead and hit the lights here. Yes, as you can see, extremely good loom. Whether it's the loom that they used, the way that it's applied, the surface area that it's covering, it just all comes together really well, like you would expect. Again, this is, kind of a no-nonsense, back-to-basics type of diver, and I dig that. It honestly makes me a bit nostalgic for, the early years of collecting within kind of my watch journey. But one thing I like to work in, of course, is some low light transition, because you're not always going to be out in the middle of a field enjoying direct sunlight. A lot of times you're going to find yourself coming in and out of buildings, walking underneath overhangs, maybe underneath the shade of a tree, or just spending time in your favorite automobile. So it's nice to see what these colors, textures, and finishes render like in less than optimal lighting, to even include some harsh lighting like you're going to see here, which will typically expose any type of production defects. But you can see that the light just glides very uniformly over this nice brushing here. You do have those polished center links, which some of you have probably been screaming at the screen, really upset about, but you know what? Sometimes they work, and I think in this case, if this was fully brushed, because of the lack of a, really defined taper on the bracelets, that it would have appeared a bit, I think, chunky on the wrist, and I think that those polished center links actually do help visually the watch play better. I would prefer it would be fully brushed. If they went down to maybe a 22 lug, that would actually taper down to about an 18 millimeter clasp. Here it just goes down to a 20, so very slight taper, still there, still works, and actually will probably be preferable for many people, but just, you know, maybe not for me, or for those of you that are, you know, more into kind of the more refined vintage aesthetic. This definitely has a more tool-like aesthetic, but that blue dial for me is what does it. We'll just play with that here. Look at the way that the dial just stays very deep and dark, very reminiscent of, let's say, an SKX 009 in terms of that blackish, grayish, deep dark blue that really only renders blue in particular lighting, but most of the time will pretty much look black, like you can see here. And then the way that that bezel plays, it's almost like a black bezel that's been faded, you know, in a lot of different lightings. But of course, in full on lighting, it's going to be just a really handsome tone of blue. And even here under the camera, it's probably rendering a bit brighter than what you'll actually experience in real life. It's just that, hey, the lights are bright here in the studio for this tabletop review. So in terms of closing thoughts, guys, on the wrist, it does wear a lot like an SKX 009. So if you wore that watch and had success with it, and you would think that, man, if that watch was only a bit thinner, and maybe a bit more traditional looking, I'd love that watch. Hey, this is a bit thinner and a bit more traditional looking, so you might love this watch. In terms of comparable models, yes, the $600 automatic diver space is quite competitive from both mainstream brands and micro brands. But for me, what sets Momentum apart is their history of actually producing wristwatches for military and law enforcement units. So when they go back and revisit Milsub specs set by the British Ministry of Defense, I think it does tend to feel a bit more organic than your typical homage brand. So kudos to them. For me, guys, the bottom line on this one, the Momentum brand is really well known within the outdoor and military markets. So their pieces are clearly made for more than just looks. They're actually as capable and robust as their designs imply. These are legitimate tool watches, and, you know, they're made to be worn and enjoyed. And I like that. You know, this is a brand, you're not going to baby it. It's not, you know, super cheap, but it's definitely far from expensive at around $629 in terms of a reliable mechanical dive watch. You know, you're getting a lot for your money, and you're getting something that can be worn. It just has a certain class to it. And if folks know what Momentum watches are, then they know their history, right? And then if they don't, then you get to explain it to somebody, right? So that's kind of fun. It becomes a conversational piece as well as a timepiece. So with that said, yeah, if you like the video, please do hit like, and if you haven't already, please subscribe for more content just like this. Thanks, guys.